Welcome to the AT Center at TCNJ. My name is Vanessa Lombardo, and we are excited to bring you this AAC webinar series. Our first session is titled AAC 101. This webinar is presented by Sarah Brown, a New Jersey licensed and ASHA certified speech and language pathologist specializing in augmentative and alternative communication. These webinars are made possible through our partnership with the New Jersey Department of Education, Office of Special Education. The statements issued by our guest presenters do not reflect the stance of the NJDOE OSC. Please use your professional judgment when implementing strategies and resources within your practice. To learn more about the professional development opportunities offered by the AT Center at TCNJ, please visit us at atcenter.tcnj.edu.
All right, so good evening, everyone, and welcome to Introduction to Augmentative and Alternative Communication, AAC 101. My name is Sarah Brown, and I will be presenting tonight. So please help me get to know you in the chat. If you could tell me your name, where you're from, what brings you here tonight. So for example, if you're a teacher, a parent of a child with a disability, a student, future therapist, or just interested in the topic, I'd love to hear more about what brought you here tonight. SLP, okay. All right, special education teacher. Love seeing all these teachers. This is wonderful. SLP in preschool. Okay, California, wonderful. Okay. Educational assistant. Love it. SLP K through 8. Okay, private and in the schools. Hi, Angela, welcome. All right. Love it. School psychologist. So wonderful. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Okay. So now that I've gotten to know more about all of you, I'd like to introduce myself and share more about my background before we get started. So as I mentioned before, I am licensed in the state of New Jersey. I'm also licensed in the state of North Carolina. I actually just relocated to Charlotte a few months ago. I am certified by the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association. I've presented statewide on the topic of AAC to different universities and schools. I'm a member of the New Jersey Speech and Hearing Association, as well as the North Carolina Speech and Hearing Association. And I actually served as the chair for the Interprofessional Autism Committee for the New Jersey Speech and Hearing Association. I've practiced in a variety of settings, including early intervention, public and private schools, higher education, as well as private practice, where I'm currently at right now. And my areas of interest include AAC, of course, autism, sensory integration and processing, early language development, and neurodiversity affirming therapy. And on a more personal note, I know many of you are viewing this presentation as a parent. My husband and I are expecting our first child in June, so I'm looking forward to the future and being able to speak not only as a professional, but as a parent from a parent perspective as well. As a result of this webinar, participants will be able to define AAC, who uses it and why, understand the benefits and challenges of AAC, and become aware of 3 myths associated with AAC use and what the current research supports. AAC is truly a topic that I'm incredibly passionate about, and I encourage the audience to ask any and all related questions in the chat. If you're anything like me, if I wait until the end, I may forget my question. So please feel free to type in your questions as they come or jot it down on a piece of paper. We will be monitoring the chat for questions and addressing them during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. I would like to note that the content tonight is really a brief overview of AAC, and the upcoming webinars get into a lot more specific detail. So hopefully you leave here tonight with a nice foundation, but by no means would I expect anyone to be an expert on all things AAC after tonight. Okay, so just a quick but important note on language and terminology. So during this presentation, you may hear the term AAC user based on feedback from AAC users that this is a preferred term. Non-speaking instead of nonverbal. The term nonverbal can have a negative connotation and may imply a lack of language or ability to understand. AAC device or AAC system will be used instead of talker based on the feedback from AAC users that this is also a preferred term. And generally, when speaking to a group or presenting, I will defer to using identity first language based on the preferences of many autistic adults, meaning saying autistic person instead of person with autism. But when working one on one with students or their families, I will ask what they prefer. So, when in doubt, it never hurts to ask. Language matters and shapes perceptions. Terminology is constantly changing, and it's important that we listen to and include the opinions of people with lived experience. So, jumping right into augmentative and alternative communication defined. So, AAC stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication, and it refers to tools and strategies that can enhance speech or provide a completely different means of communication. It falls under the broader umbrella of assistive technology or the use of equipment, tools, and strategies to improve functional daily living in people with various disabilities and limitations. Augmentative means to supplement or add to someone's speech, so it includes things that can make your message more clear to a listener, such as using facial expressions or gestures, as I'm doing right now. Alternative means instead of, so it includes things that replace spoken language, such as a dedicated communication device, which can only be used for communication purposes, or an iPad with the communication app. And this is when we have an iPad that can be used for many different things in addition to communication purposes. A key takeaway that I hope you leave here tonight with is the emphasis on the augmentative definition. Most often, when people think of AAC, the image of a non speaker comes to mind, but we can't forget that it is also for adding to existing speech. AAC can be very flexible because communication needs are very different from person to person. Some people use AAC all day and every day, while others use it only in certain situations. So, who uses AAC and why? AAC is used by individuals of all ages who have difficulty with spoken or written language, or if their speech is not easily understood by others. For example, people diagnosed with neurological differences such as autism, genetic conditions such as Down syndrome, acquired disorders such as traumatic brain injury or stroke, progressive disorders such as Parkinson's disease or multiple sclerosis, and individuals with temporary impairments, like after surgery or an injury affecting speech. These are just a few examples. However, it's important to note that we all use AAC on a day to day basis with or without a diagnosis. Whether it's writing a letter, texting a friend, pointing to give directions, these are all forms of communication that aren't spoken language. I would also like to note that a diagnosis alone does not automatically qualify you for AAC. So, why do people use AAC? To express their needs, wants, thoughts, and ideas, to participate in social interactions, to support speech and language development when there is a delay or a disorder, and to increase independence and quality of life. So, I have here a few case study examples. So, let's go ahead and read about Stephanie, Michael, and Brian. So, Stephanie is a 13-year-old autistic girl who primarily communicates using echolalia. She often repeats lines from her favorite TV shows, books, and familiar routines to initiate interactions, make requests, express emotions, and manage sensory input. We have Michael. Michael is a 40-year-old male adult diagnosed with Down syndrome. He loves socializing and greeting customers at work. However, he becomes fatigued easily and is unable to raise the volume of his voice by the end of his shift. And then we have Brian, who is a 3-year-old boy with strong receptive language, or the ability to understand and comprehend. He was diagnosed with a speech delay and only has about 20 words that he consistently is able to say. He is very aware of his expressive limitations and becomes frustrated very easily when his parents and peers do not understand him. So, what do all these examples have in common? They each present as candidates that would likely benefit from AAC. However, an AAC evaluation with a licensed speech language pathologist is always warranted in order to fully assess current receptive and expressive language skills, identify specific communication needs, and to determine which AAC system would be most appropriate. So, in my opinion, Stephanie would be a great candidate for AAC because she primarily communicates using echolalia, which is the repetition of words and phrases heard that are echoed after the fact. We could have an entire presentation just on this topic alone, but AAC would likely be beneficial for Stephanie and her family to determine where her scripts are coming from, what they mean, and ultimately to support her in producing original and flexible language. Michael would be a great candidate for part-time AAC to reduce vocal fatigue and to allow him to socialize more throughout the day without losing his voice by the end of his shift. This description does not say anything about intelligibility or his ability to be understood by others, but AAC could support this area as well. And Brian is very aware of his expressive language limitations, and an immediate goal I would have would be to put a functional means of communication in place so that he does not continue to become frustrated and lose motivation to communicate. Because he has strengths in receptive language, it is likely that he will be able to follow directions and learn how to use AAC with consistent modeling and exposure. So we will get into common myths and misconceptions later in this presentation, but it's important to keep in mind that just because someone has some speech, like each of these examples do, does not mean that they are not candidates for AAC. Another thing that I would like to note is that you're never too young or too old to benefit from AAC, and this can be seen in these examples as well. So communication functions. What are communication functions? Communication functions are all the reasons we communicate. For example, if you're a parent of a young child, on a day-to-day basis, you may be giving a lot of directions, answering the infamous why question multiple times a day, and protesting by saying no or stop to your toddler. I have listed here 8 different communication functions, but this is not an exhaustive list. I'd like for everyone to take a moment to reflect upon your day. What communication functions did you use? Did you greet someone, compliment a coworker, ask a question? Please take a moment to type a few communication functions in the chat that you used today. Gave directions, protested, requested. Okay, great. Greetings. Yes, we're always greeting everyone, especially in the morning. Start a conversation, request. Ask questions, gave directions, start a conversation, gave an opinion. Yep, directions, requests, start a conversation. Shared IEP information. Yeah, shared info. Great. Awesome. Okay, so let's see. So I myself asked for help. I gave an opinion and I greeted my clients as well as each of you tonight, just to name a few. So as you can see, just based on the responses in the chat, there are so many reasons to communicate. So when thinking about someone that may benefit from AAC, I always look at the communication functions they currently have in their repertoire. I also use communication functions with current AAC users to inform goal planning for them. And if you work with AAC users like I do, you likely have come across someone who primarily uses their device to request, and you're unsure of how to get them beyond this point. So when I see this occur, my initial thought is to reference my list of communication functions and to speak with all of his or her communication partners to see what is being modeled throughout the day. Is the device only being used for the purpose of requesting toys and snacks? So while requesting can be a great starting point with with new AAC users, it can be very easy to get stuck here. So even if it appears that the AAC user is not paying attention or interested in using other communication functions, it's very important that we model and expose them to a variety of language. I'll be getting into a lot more detail on this topic in tomorrow's webinar, as well as on May 22nd in the webinar titled AAC Best Practice. I also reached out to Assistiveware and gained permission to share their communication functions handout. That's a great resource. I have it linked there in the presentation, so you'll have that as well. Okay, so types of AAC. AAC is generally broken down into two categories known as unaided and aided AAC. So under the unaided category, it's also known as no tech. It does not require any external tool. It's communication done solely with the body. So for example, gestures, facial expressions, sign language, and body language. Under the aided category, we have light tech, mid tech, and high tech. It's communication methods that require external tools or devices. For example, you may have heard of Core Boards, GoTalk, an iPad with a communication app, etc. So a pro or strength in using unaided AAC is that it is always available and no external tools are needed or required. However, a limitation is that it may not be understood by everyone and requires fine motor skills or physical ability to perform certain movements. For example, many daycares and preschools incorporate sign language into their daily routines and songs. However, I have had some parents who say that they see their child signing but do not know what it means when they come home. A pro or strength in using aided AAC, depending on the type, generally is that they are easy to personalize and they're portable. A con or limitation is that some forms can be expensive, need charging or a power source. Also, generally, training and technical support may be required. Okay, so here are just some different visual examples within each category. So under unaided AAC, I previously mentioned this includes forms of communication that only requires the body and no external means. For example, sign language, facial expressions, pointing, and body language. And then under light tech, these are paper-based tools to support communication. And even though they are paper-based, they are considered light tech because they still required some technology to create them, such as a printer. So some examples I have here are an alphabet board, a communication book, and printed visuals for a choice board. So under mid-tech, we have examples such as an 8-button AAC, a Big Mac, which produces a single message, and a 2-button AAC. When we think of mid-tech communication systems, they are battery operated and require a recorded voice. Typically, they have a single overlay or static display, which means that all symbols are constantly displayed on the device. And then the last category is high-tech AAC. And high-tech refers to tools with higher processing capabilities and synthesized speech. Synthesized speech allows users to create messages in the moment instead of relying on a pre-recorded message. It includes dedicated devices, which can only be used for the purpose of communication, and iPads or tablets with the communication app installed. An AAC user that has a communication app on an iPad is still able to use that iPad for other purposes beyond communication. You may have heard of the communication apps such as Proloquo to Go or TouchChat. For dedicated systems, you may have heard of companies such as Tobii Dynavox or PRC Saltillo. So an AAC system can include all types of AAC and should be individualized based on the strengths and support needs of each child or adult. One thing that's important to note is that there's no hierarchy when it comes to any AAC. Light tech is actually also referred to as low tech, but as a field, we are shifting away from low to light because many people assume that low tech is associated with low functioning, which couldn't be further from the truth. So, AAC is a powerful tool that can open up communication and support language development for individuals with various communication needs. However, every form of AAC, whether it's high tech devices, communication boards, or gestures, has its own limitations. No single method works perfectly in every situation. That's why a total communication approach, which encourages the use of multiple modes of speech, like speech, signs, symbols, and technology together, is recommended. It gives individuals the flexibility to communicate in a way that works best for them across different environments and situations. And if you're interested in learning more about AAC types and funding, there will be another free webinar focused solely on this topic on May 21st. So make sure to register for that one. Okay, so here are just a few additional examples of AAC in action. So from a few of my sessions, you'll see light tech paper-based examples and a student using an iPad with the communication app TouchChat. I also received permission from a family that I work with to share a video from one of our sessions. So before we watch, I'd like to make mention of a few things. So one thing you'll notice is that my student was not sitting in a chair, but instead was engaging in a sensory-based activity that supports his attention and ability to participate. He independently came to me after I modeled language in a low pressure and naturalistic way. I modeled what I thought he wanted to say when he handed me a muffin bag prior to to the video. We just talked about unaided and aided AAC. And even though my student primarily is using a device to communicate, I always pair a gesture or sign with speech to provide that total communication approach. That way, if for any reason he does not have access to his device, he also has been exposed to the sign as well that could be used to communicate a want or need. You'll hear him use his device to say open, even though the bag was already open. Instead of withholding the item or correcting him, I acknowledge his response and tell him that it is open and continue to model the action word eat. So, beyond the eating of the muffins, using the device paired with my affect created this social environment where we both were engaged, locked in on each other, and enjoying the moment. And this is what communication is all about. It should never be forced, stressful, or seem like a chore. So, let's watch. Muffins. Muffins. Eat, eat, eat. Muffins. Ooh, chocolate chip. Chocolate chip. It's already open. We're going to eat, eat, eat. Okay. And I forgot to point out too that at the very beginning of the video, you could see like the shadow of his head and he was jumping. And then as soon as I started modeling, he like poked his head over the trampoline. Um, so I think that that's just a really good example too, because I know a lot of therapists tend to, want their child to sit in the chair or think that if they're not directly looking at them, that they're not paying attention. So I think that's a really good example of how a child can definitely still be paying attention to you even though they're not directly looking at you. Okay, so let's exit out of this and go back to our presentation. Okay. So Now that we have discussed what AAC is, who it's for, and different types, we are now going to learn about the why we should be using it with our students and clients. So number one, it enhances expressive communication. So AAC supports the development of expressive language by providing AAC users with consistent and accessible ways to communicate their thoughts, wants, and needs. Number two, it improves receptive language skills. So access to AAC can help improve understanding of language, especially when visual supports are used to reinforce spoken words. Researchers Drager and Allen note that AAC systems paired with modeling improves both receptive and expressive language. And number three, it promotes social interaction and engagement. So AAC enables users to participate more actively in social interactions with peers, caregivers, and educators. Researchers Light and McNaughton emphasize that AAC supports social competence, including initiating and maintaining conversations. So number four, increases participation in educational activities. So AAC supports access to curriculum by allowing students to answer questions, participate in discussions, and demonstrate knowledge. Research by Soto and Yu 2014 highlight how AAC fosters active classroom participation and academic engagement. Number five, it can reduce frustration and behavioral challenges. So, by providing a functional means of communication, AAC can reduce frustration related behaviors linked to breakdowns in communication. Gans et al. 2012 found that AAC use, particularly picture based systems, was associated with reductions in challenging behaviors. And then number six, it supports language development over time. So AAC, especially when introduced early and supported consistently, can lead to long-term gains in the development of language and overall communication skills. Research by Miller, Light, and Schlosser has found that AAC use, particularly speech-generating devices, to support development of spoken language. I have a short video that I'll be showing you tonight that demonstrates how early and consistent use of AAC has impacted a young girl's communication skills over time.
My name is Dana Nieder. I live in New York City. My name is Dana Nieder. I live in New York City with my husband and our two children, Maya and Will. My daughter, Maya, is 10 years old and she has been using her AAC system since she was 3. It's not an exaggeration to say that Maya's AAC use altered the trajectory of her whole life. It seems nearly impossible to summarize the impact of Maya's early access to robust AAC because it changed everything. Her AAC use, even as a very young child, opened so many doors, and each door led to new halls and doorways, and now we've ended up in a totally different wing in the building of life than we would have had access to without AAC. But that's very abstract. Here are some concrete examples of how AAC changed Maya's life. AAC let Maya share her personality. She made her first joke, looking out the window on a bright sunny morning and then pushing Rainy and laughing shortly after she got her device. She was funny. AAC let Maya express her feelings, like when her best friend was absent on the day she brought her favorite toy in for show and tell, and when I asked her how she felt about it, she said, heartbroken. AAC changed Maya's educational path. When the social worker at our school interview watched Maya and I talk through her device, she actually picked up her phone, called the principal and the head of the speech department, and said, "You've got to come see this little girl use her device in my office." And they ended up placing her in a very different class, the strongest academic placement, than the one in which they had tentatively placed her. AAC let Maya show us that she had learned to read, and that proof of literacy further expanded the rigor of her academic goals and the belief in her academic abilities. AAC let Maya self-advocate. On a particularly frightening day, when I arrived at the school to pick her up and she had bruises on her arms, we went straight to the principal's office and Maya was able to use her device to report what happened and whom she was with at the time. Words are power, and non-speaking children can be powerless. Every single person that works with Maya knows that she has the words and the ability to tell others about their interactions with her, and that shapes the way that people interact with her. AAC changed everything because no amount of me saying that she's smart and funny and clever and driven is as powerful as 30 seconds of watching Maya talk for herself. The most frightening part of Maya's AAC story was that I found out about AAC completely by chance. We had seen dozens of doctors and therapists, including 4 speech-language pathologists, by the time that I independently heard about AAC and began to pursue a device for Maya. A goal that I would set for the AAC field would be to increase AAC awareness among pediatric medical and therapy providers, particularly those who practice in subspecialties that are likely to serve children with disabilities, such as developmental pediatricians, pediatric neurologists, geneticists. I'd like to see research done about the effects of training these practitioners about AAC and the subsequent number of patients that they could identify as potential AAC users and refer for AAC evaluations. Another goal that I would have for the AAC field is to continue pursuing ways to support AAC parents and families. It doesn't matter how much research we have about specific type of AAC devices or language targets, if families are abandoning their devices because they feel overwhelmed, disinterested, or unsupported. We need continued research into and emphasis on communication partner training and family support, so much so that speech-language pathologists will feel that providing family support is an essential component of evidence-based AAC therapy.
Okay. Exit out of this. Okay, we'll get back to our presentation. Okay, so let me see here. So this video resonated with me for many different reasons. I appreciated that it was from a parent's perspective and highlighted the significant impact AAC has had on her daughter's life. I also valued the emphasis on how AAC enabled Maya to engage in a range of communication functions, such as joking, self-advocating, and expressing emotions, like sadness when her friend was absent during a show and tell activity. Without AAC, Maya likely would not have been able to communicate these thoughts and feelings. Access to AAC fundamentally shaped the ways in which teachers and other adults interacted with her and ultimately contributed to her placement in a more advanced educational setting. So now we're going to talk about some different challenges of AAC. So while the advantages of AAC are well documented and can have a profound impact on communication development, it is equally important to consider the challenges that may arise prior to and during implementation. Recognizing these barriers helps us work together more effectively, plan proactively, and provide consistent, meaningful support to AAC users across settings. So number 1, we have stigma and myths. Many people hold outdated beliefs about AAC, such as the fear that using a device will stop a child from speaking. In reality, research shows that AAC often supports and encourages spoken language development. Additionally, some people believe that AAC is only for non-speaking individuals, when in fact, it can benefit a variety of people with various communication needs, including people who primarily communicate with spoken language, as we discussed earlier tonight in our case study examples. As parents, caregivers, and educators, it's important to challenge these myths by focusing on a child's right to communicate in any way that works best for them. Embracing AAC as a tool for connection, not as a last resort, can shift the mindset from if to how we support communication. So caregiver and communication partner buy-in. So caregiver and communication partner buy-in can be another barrier to AAC implementation. Families may feel overwhelmed, uncertain, or even resistant. They may worry that it is too complicated or that it will further stigmatize their child. Teachers can help by partnering with SLPs and families to communicate concerns and share small wins occurring throughout the school day. SLPs can share real-life examples and discuss research, much like we're doing tonight, to show how AAC supports learning, self-expression, and independence. So building trust takes time, but consistent communication, support, and encouragement can go a long way in helping caregivers feel empowered. And number 3, we have lack of training for SLPs, teachers, and parents. So this can be a significant barrier to AAC. Many teachers do not feel confident using the device in class. Parents often get handed a device and do not know how to model language at home, rightfully so. And even many SLPs receive limited AAC training in graduate school. This gap can lead to underuse and incorrect use of AAC, which I see a lot of. The good news is you don't have to be an expert to get started using AAC. Simple strategies such as pointing to icons as you say the spoken word, also known as modeling, during daily routines and offering choices using AAC can make a big impact. Access to ongoing training, such as what you are all doing tonight, and collaboration can empower everyone involved. So some more challenges we have is funding. So funding AAC devices can be very expensive, and the process of getting one can be long and overwhelming. Insurance companies may deny coverage or require extensive paperwork. Families may not know where to start, and schools often can have very limited resources. SLPs can and should be guiding families through the funding process, advocating for student needs, and exploring temporary options like loaner devices and light tech AAC to ensure that a student does not go without a voice while waiting for a dedicated device or formal AAC evaluation. So number 5, consistency and motivation to use. So AAC only works if it is used regularly across all environments, not just during 30-minute speech sessions. So this means that teachers, parents, and other adults need to model and respond to a child's AAC use throughout the day. So consistency can be hard, especially when life gets busy or when the device feels like just one more thing to manage. It's also very common for AAC users to go through quiet periods or of lower motivation. So staying consistent to the best of our ability with modeling, making AAC meaningful, and celebrating progress, no matter how small, can help keep everyone encouraged to move forward. I always tell the families that I work with to strive for progress over perfection. And number 6, AAC suitability in various settings. So AAC access shouldn't stop when a child leaves school. Outdoor or dynamic settings like the pool, playground, or family vacations bring unique challenges. Devices may not be waterproof, easy to carry, or readily available. SLPs can support teachers and parents in planning ahead by laminating communication boards, wearing core vocabulary lanyards, or exploring waterproof cases. The goal is always to provide consistent access to communication tools for children to express themselves no matter where they go. So now we're going to talk about a few myths and misconceptions. So there are many myths and misconceptions about AAC that may deter professionals or families from AAC use. This is why we are discussing a few of these myths here tonight. So myth number 1, AAC is a last resort in speech language intervention. The fact is, the research shows that AAC can positively influence early communication development and should be implemented while speech and language are being developed to prevent further delays and frustration. So when AAC was first emerging in the field of speech-language pathology, it was considered a last resort and only to be used when every other method and strategy had been exhausted. However, when we know better, we do better, and research now widely indicates that early intervention using augmentative and alternative communication supports both receptive and expressive language skills and has an overall positive influence on early communication development. So myth number 2, AAC will inhibit spoken language. The fact is that AAC does not hurt or delay developing speech. In fact, studies show the opposite. Access to AAC can actually increase vocalizations and spoken language. So the myth that AAC is a last resort goes hand in hand with this myth that AAC inhibits spoken language. Many parents fear that use of AAC will take away a child's motivation to speak. However, this is simply not supported by the available empirical data. The literature actually suggests just the opposite outcome. So, although improvements in speech production should not be the primary goal of AAC implementation, it is an added bonus that the research supports this and can be used to ease caregiver worries and concerns. And so now we have myth number 3, and there are certain prerequisite skills that a child must have before AAC can be introduced. And the fact is that AAC supports children with communication disabilities in developing functional communication, cognitive literacy, and social communication skills. So the American Speech and Hearing Association states that there are no specific prerequisites, age, cognitive, linguistic, or motor, for getting started with AAC. However, many professionals still practice under the assumption that cognitive skills such as demonstrating communicative intent and understanding cause and effect, or even certain motor skills such as isolating a finger, are needed prior to AAC use. However, research by Kress and Marvin, as well as Zangari and Kangas, states that impaired cognition does not preclude communication. This means that even if someone has difficulty with thinking and understanding, this does not stop them from being able to communicate. This is an outdated way of thinking that is extremely harmful. Access to communication is a human right, and no person should be denied this right. So now just some key takeaways from tonight. Number 1 is that AAC supports all communicators. It is not just for non-speaking or minimally speaking people. AAC can be a benefit for a wide range of communication needs, no matter your age or whether you have some speech or not. Number 2, AAC is a language system, not just a device. So effective AAC use goes beyond technology. It includes symbols, gestures, communication boards, etc., all of which are designed to support language development and meaningful interactions. And then number 3, AAC does not hinder speech development. Start early and presume competence. Introducing AAC early and presuming the user's ability to learn encourages language growth and prevents further delays in communication development. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about the upcoming webinars coming up. So tomorrow night, we will be having the webinar, The Role of AAC in Supporting Language Development. On 4/28, we'll be having the webinar, Integrating AAC into Daily Routines. On 4/29, we'll have AAC in the Inclusive Classroom. On 5/21, we'll have Types of AAC and How to Acquire It. And on 5/22, we'll have Augmentative and Alternative Communication Best Practice. So please make sure to register for those or share with a friend or colleague if you haven't done so already. All right, and then we do have a survey that will be going out after the presentation. Your feedback is greatly appreciated and helps me improve for future presentations. So once you complete this, you'll receive your certificate of completion. And if you have additional questions after the Q&A segment or would like to get in touch with me, here's my email, and feel free to message me on my speech therapy Instagram account, Lips to Language. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right into the Q&A portion. Let's see, let me open up my chat and let's see here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Sarah, there was a question in the chat about iPad cases, and they were specifically looking at the one in the video that you played, and we weren't sure which one that was, but I don't know if you have any recommendations about cases like that or thoughts about those kind of cases for iPads.
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, a lot of my clients tend to get cases from Amazon. But if you do go the dedicated device route, Tobii Dynavox or whatever company you're working with will have like a special case that will fit the device you're working with. But I would say the majority of my clients get a lot of their cases from Amazon. Okay, so let's see what other. Can the link to the communication function handout be provided in the chat? For some reason, the link in the PDF does not work for me, even when downloaded. Yes, I can definitely put that link. So let me grab that.
We did that, Sarah. We did that already. We put that in there. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so yeah, so everyone feel free to ask questions. And then I also have some commonly asked questions as well prepared. Let's see.
I saw some comments in the chat about the survey link, and I just reposted it. If you could check that out and let me know in the chat if that one's working.
If you have any other additional questions about the overview for AAC tonight, you can feel free to drop those in the chat, or if you want, you can even unmute yourself if you want to ask any questions to Sarah before we're done for tonight.
I did see one, but I'm getting so many messages scrolling up. So
there was one that was just dropped in the chat just now, if that's helpful. It was, what's the process of acquiring an AAC device when working in the private practice setting?
yeah, so that's a great question. And I'm actually going to be going into a lot more detail specifically on funding and how to acquire devices. Let me see the date on that one. But I am in private practice right now, so I definitely feel you if you're struggling with that. But I will be going into a lot more specific detail on funding and acquiring devices on May 21st. Okay, I see one that says, oh, this was a direct message. Will you address how to support a student fixated on the AAC instead of using it functionally? So that's a really great question, and one that I see very, very often. So it's a little bit difficult to answer if I'm not working with a student myself, but I'd like to know a little bit more about the students. Are they doing it at all times of the day? Is it, are they very dysregulated? What stage in the AAC journey are they? Are they a beginning user? Because oftentimes what we see as non-functional use of the device is actually them babbling on it and learning and kind of learning how to use the device. So oftentimes I do see that a lot where a student will be a new AAC user and they will be playing with buttons and kind of stimming on a certain button or something like that. And the device is oftentimes taken away from them or the volume's turned down. So I would like to know a little bit more information about the student. But typically it's for a reason, right? But we would never, just like a student who's talking with their natural voice, we would never, put tape over their mouth or take away their voice. So I would say that we should honor their communication. So let's say if they're stimming or babbling on a specific icon, maybe present that item to them. Or if it's a specific person, always we want to validate and acknowledge that they are communicating, even if we think it's non-functional. So again, another example, like let's say they're just saying a random, one time I actually did have a student who was pressing the olive button, and he navigated into condiments and found olives. And the teacher was so wonderful. She brought in olives the next day and modeled olives. And he did, in fact, want olives. So sometimes, if it may seem very abnormal to you or I, we always want to treat it as functional, even if it may seem not functional. And like I said, the constant stimming or babbling, I'd like to know what stage they're in their AAC journey. And sometimes students do need sensory regulation, or maybe to go for a walk and to be brought back to their device. But we never want to take away a device, so that's never going to be the option. But if you'd like to message me or email me and we could talk more about it, I'd like to hear more details about that student, because it's hard to fully say without knowing more about their profile.
Thanks for that. We had another question drop in the chat. Is there specific research you can share about using short phrases? I just moved in the buttons versus one word for early learners. They have a student who receives ABA in the home, and the BCBA has instructed the RBT to not use boards that the SLP has created because the buttons have more than one word.
I'm wondering if that's related to like Gestalt language learners. It sounds like it is, where we'll put like a phrase in. Off the top of my head, I can write that down, and that could be something that maybe I address and like send out to you at a later time. I'm not thinking if there's specific research on inputting phrases versus individual words, but I will say that device programming is very individualized for the learner. And we always want to be thinking about long-term use and what is most efficient for that learner in that point in time. So I don't think sometimes it's also about using your clinical judgment and not just only what the research says, because AAC, there's so much that there isn't research on. So I would say I don't know if it's necessarily appropriate to not use certain buttons. But again, I'd like to know what stage that learner is. Like, do they have an understanding of individual words? And maybe that's why the BCBA is saying that, because she feels like they don't fully understand the full sentence or that full meaning. So maybe that's why she's saying that. But I'm not sure if there's specific research on this, but I would say that it is about using your clinical judgment. And if you are modeling and using something in context, like that's how they learn. But I don't think it's appropriate necessarily to say we shouldn't be putting any phrases in, because a lot of devices are pre-programmed with phrases. And that's how the device companies, like, they recommend that in addition to core vocabulary words as well.
I think you're also highlighting, Sarah, the importance of communication between SLPs and BCBAs and other professionals who are working together with the same, AAC devices.
Another note on that too is I really do hope that professionals that are working would work together. And again, I don't know necessarily. I don't think there should be one field that's like dictating what should be done. It should be a collaborative effort.
Thanks for that. Any other questions, folks? People want to drop in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, we can unmute you.
And then I do see the additional comments about how RBTs and BCBAs are notorious for not staying in their lane, and the SLP should have authority here. And I would like to say I definitely have in the past felt very territorial over devices and like, oh, this is my domain. Why are you infringing upon that? But I've come to learn that even SLPs, there's many of us that aren't very knowledgeable in AAC programming and working with AAC devices. So that's why, again, I would say that I don't necessarily love the, oh, this should defer to me, or because that BCBA may very well have taken a lot of AAC trainings. So I don't know if the staying in their lane, even though it's difficult sometimes, especially when you have a person who's kind of like dictating and telling you what to do when it is technically more our field. Um, but again, we want to be promoting a collaborative effort. And it isn't just about the research, but it's also about clinical judgment. So maybe if you could explain to her how you're using it in your sessions, maybe take a video of it, and explain that we're building like the process of language development. And it's not just about like what the research says, but it's also about the client in front of you and their individual profile.
Hmm. Another question dropped in the chat too, about if you have any advice about when to change home screen layout or menus to add new words, which I know I'm sure is based on the kid, but I'm wondering if there's any generalized advice that you might have.
Yeah, so typically, again, it is very individualized on, cognitive, visual, all those kind of like motor skills. Um, I tend to leave the home screens the same because we want to be supporting motor planning. But let's say, you think it's like too overstimulating, or if a child has a visual impairment, excuse me, I always recommend to hide icons. That way they're still in their placements and you can always unhide them later at a later point. But when we're just kind of erasing a whole system and adding things individually, that's not a route that I necessarily would recommend unless you have like a very specific reason for that. But I do think it's better to keep a certain to trial it and see how it's working and then adjust from there. But definitely hiding icons is a preferred method, other than kind of erasing things and adding things as you go.
Hmm. There's another question in here too about the Weave chat. Came across Weave chat as an AAC option. Is that an app you know about or that you would recommend?
So I've actually never heard of that option before. So that's the beauty of the AAC field and technology as a whole, is that it's constantly changing. So I'm going to write that down and I'm going to look into that myself. But I've never heard of Weave Chat
Okay.
before.
Yeah. Another question that came after that.
Oh,
Oh, no, sorry. Go ahead, Madison.
I was just gonna chime in and say, what I know about it is, it's free and they pride themselves on it being free and accessible, for, people who, and going through that hefty insurance process, as Sarah was saying, having access to something that's free, could help support a lot of families in the interim while they're trying to help their child grow their language skills and they're not moving through that process fast enough. So
Thanks for that. Got two more that just popped in the chat. Sarah, we've got what are some best practices when training parents with new devices? This person is an SLP working in a public preschool setting, and they have limited time for training, which is challenging.
Absolutely. And one thing I liked to emphasize in the beginning of the session is that I have worked in a variety of settings. So right now I'm in private practice, but I was in the school setting, and I definitely relate to some of these questions or things that teachers and SLPs in the school setting. It's very different. So I would say an example of this that I've done in the past, and again, this is very individualized to the school you're at and the parents that you're working with, but there's been times that I've asked for permission from my director as well as the parent, to say like, hey, can we use so and so one of their sessions this week to do a training session, a direct training session, and that may the student can still be in the room, so you're still providing that direct patient care. But that's definitely been an option that I've done in the past. I've asked if I could use a session for that parent training. So ask for it never hurts to ask. Let's see, what other things can I think of? So what are some best practices when training parents with new devices? I also, again, I know time is very consuming and we don't have a lot of it in the school setting, but I'm a huge advocate of sending home articles or just like free research for parents, highlighting things. Again, like I know that's time consuming, but I did have a lot of families that really appreciated that. And they would email me and say, hey, like, I saw that you sent home something about this. Like, can we talk more about this? Or, I did that specifically when I was moving a client. They were on PECs, and I wanted to send some information home about high tech communication. And I did have the parent be a lot more receptive to a device after me sending home some information. So definitely, if you can, any handouts or like parent friendly research is very helpful. And then talking to whoever's in charge at your school and asking them for permission, and then documenting that session, that day or that week was used for direct parent coaching. Another thing I would say too, if your school is a little bit more strict about those kind of things, is building that into the IEP. Like, hey, one session per month is going to be parent coaching. And that's something I would definitely recommend with especially new AAC users, building in a parent coaching model into the IEP, which I think a lot of people don't think about.
Mm. We have another question in the chat too about supporting ESL students in the classroom who may use an AAC device, and especially thinking about when they might have limited vocabulary in both of the languages that they're working with. And I don't know what that's a big topic, but I don't know what kind of thoughts you might want to share for tonight.
It's a very big topic. I would say, I guess, the app that I'm familiar with, like Proloquo, does can be in different languages as well. But if you, the SLP, aren't proficient in that language, I don't know how productive it's going to be, modeling when you can't understand the language. So I'm not sure. I guess that's a tough one, and it's one that I really haven't come across a lot. But we do know that bilingual students, it's equally valid and important. It doesn't cause a delay or anything like that. But if you're not proficient in the language, then you can't really be providing that support.
Mm. Nice, folks. Do we have any other questions or folks who want to chime in with their thoughts? All right. Well, if any more questions come in, I'm going to start wrapping us up, but we'll happily answer those questions. Sarah, thank you so much for a great presentation. I'm looking forward to your next presentation tomorrow at 7 p.m. My name is Matthew Hall, and I am the other faculty co-lead for the Assistive Technology Center at TCNJ. We're glad that you all were able to join us tonight for this webinar. In the chat a little while ago, but we can put it back in, there was a link to the survey, which I think works now. We were having some technical difficulties with our survey. If you could fill that survey out, that'll help us be able to send you CEUs for the webinar tonight. And we want to make sure, I'm going to share my screen for a minute. We want to make sure that you know that this isn't the end of things. Our center is at TCNJ. And if you're interested in further professional development or support, you can contact us at atcenter@tcnj.edu. Our mission is to provide free professional development on assistive technology and AAC. So if you want additional workshops or individual classroom coaching or technical assistance, if you want us to facilitate small group sessions, please just reach out. And our job is to provide that for anyone teaching in New Jersey primarily. We'll have more webinars. Like I mentioned, we have one tomorrow and another series. So we hope you all had a good night, and we'll see you back for another webinar. Thanks, folks. Really appreciate you being here.